Right, great. Good day, everybody. I'm Terry Adamson, Technical Director with Fenestration Canada. Welcome to today's webinar on software implementations. We're very happy to have Keystone Certifications sponsoring the Tech Talk sessions, and we're going to give them just a minute or two to tell us a little bit about themselves.
All of us at Keystone Certifications are pleased to be sponsoring Fenestration Canada's NAFS calculator tool. We hope you'll find the calculator both easy to use and an essential tool for determining code structural requirements across Canada. Of course, after determining the requirements, the real challenge for manufacturers is how to demonstrate compliance.
Keystone Certifications has been helping manufacturers demonstrate compliance using certification since 1998 and now offers a complete slate of accredited programs to qualify fenestration across North America. Demonstrating compliance using certification begins with a complete review of the test reports issued by an independent lab. We verify that the labs are competent to perform the testing, that all necessary tests are complete, and that the ratings are accurately determined in accordance with the reference standard. After successful review, we issue the certificate and add the product to our certified product directory, available on our website at keystonecerts.com.
The essence of certification is the standardized certification label, which is applied to the product at the factory and delivers all the necessary information to demonstrate building code and energy incentive program compliance to building officials, architects, and homeowners. Keystone offers custom certification label printing and prints millions of these labels each year. Ordering certification labels is fast and convenient through the online catalog available on our portal.
So whether you're qualifying your products for building codes, Energy Star, or the Greener Homes Initiative, Keystone Certifications is here to help.
All right, thanks again to Keystone. We'll work on that audio. I don't know if you guys had to crank it up and you turn it down now, or I'm going to sound like I'm yelling. So as our changing world adds to the challenges of how we manage our resources, both human and automated, and there might be some of you that have a combination of both of those, we can be faced with technology choices that are outside of our comfort zones. But like it or not, the need to advance these systems to satisfy new challenges can be one of the most difficult decisions you can make. I wanted to do this session, for some time now, as I've been involved in multiple software implementations. But Chris Kammer did an article recently that really spurred me on. So, Chris, props to you on getting the juices flowing again to talk about software. So today we're going to discuss the decision-making process and that terrifying realization you get once you've committed. So I'd like to welcome Chris Kammer and Josh Rudd from A+W Software, Matt Batcha and Nick Fuller from Fene-Tech North America, Sherif Eldibani from OpenJanela and Goronwy Jones from Windowmaker, and coming to us from London, England today. So thanks a lot, Goronwy, for joining us at this time. So I want to help our members understand some of the challenges of software selection and implementation. Why don't we begin by just having you guys tell us a little bit about yourselves and your company. So Chris and Josh, why don't you guys start off?
I'll start. My name is Chris Kammer. I work for A+W. I'm in marketing, and I have been in the industry roughly about 3.5 years now. So work on the window and glass side. And A+W is a great company. Been around for over 45 years now. I'll let Josh go next.
Yep, my name is Josh Rudd. I handle sales for North America for A+W Clarity, which is the glass software with some involvement on the Cantor window software as well. Been here for 2 years. Prior to that, I was general manager of Orgadat North America in Denver, doing curtain wall storefront framing software for quoting and steering of machinery. And prior to that, 7 years at EFCO Corporation, a North American commercial window manufacturer.
Great, thanks. Matt and Nick?
Yep, Matt Batcha. So Fene-Tech's been around for 25 plus years. I've been fortunate enough to be with the company for almost 20. I started on the technical side as a programmer, and then I managed our development team for almost 10 years. And then I've been in sales, responsible for window and door manufacturers since 2014. Go ahead, Nick.
Okay, I'm Nick Fuller. I'm currently group manager of the implementation services team in the window industry for Fene-Tech. And I've been with Fene-Tech for over 18 years now. So I've been doing software implementations the entire time.
Okay, Sherif?
My name is Sherif Eldibani. I am with OpenJanela Software, previously with VSM Software, and previously with Windowmaker. And so I've been at it since 1987. And that's about it.
Okay, thank you. Goronwy?
I've been doing Windows software since 1978, Windowmaker itself since 82. I first came to Canada for the Image 86 exhibition, and I've been here about 30 times since. So I'm as much North American as most of you.
1978. That must have been a notepad and an Excel sheet.
That was a computer where it was meant to fit in 8K of memory, and we had to go crawling back to the customer asking for more money for an extra 4K.
Wow, that's incredible. So I'm going to just kind of pull some scenarios. Like I mentioned, I was involved in at least 2 software implementations with the window manufacturer. I felt some of that pain, and I've certainly lived through some of the successes of some good systems. So I'm just going to throw out a few scenarios, and I'll get you guys to chime in on what you think are solutions and answers to some of these. So here I am. I struggle with what do I need a system to do? I've got a little company, limited budgets, the options, overwhelming when you start looking at software, and oftentimes they can be a lot more than what I need. So what sort of parameters do you think make sense when I start looking at what I need for software? So Goronwy, you're in London, you're far away. Let's start with you, make sure we get you in.
Okay, well, my key message is in software pioneering is risky. And if there isn't a reason to run those risks, avoid it. Find businesses similar to your own, find out what works for them and copy it.
Okay, great. Chris, what do you think there?
Josh and I usually talk about, there's certain ideas, you have what are your biggest concerns, your issues with the existing system you have, or if you even have a system at this point. Think about what your essentials are, your conditionals, and your nice to haves, like I said in the article. What are you really aiming at? How are you going to change, and what do you want to improve on? Josh, do you want to add to that?
Well, I mean, yeah, given that too, you need to understand what's within your budget, and talking with as many different software companies as you can to get some of that preliminary information. That'll help pare down the decision-making process, relatively early. And folks like me and other people, on this panel, we have best practices of implementations at other organizations, typically of your size and all sizes. And so we do bring good ideas to the table with regards to, what you could be looking at in your business.
So, okay, thanks. Window manufacturing, door manufacturing, I mean, there's such a huge range of, the company's makeup, what they do, their size, their abilities. So a medium-sized progressive company, lots of multiple custom products, but a medium-sized company, not a mammoth. They get 5, 6, 7, 8 quotes. The numbers vary wildly. All of these guys say that they are offering the same features. How can a progressive custom company sort of pare down all of these different options and quotes with wildly varying numbers? So why don't we start with Matt?
Well, I think some of it goes back to what we talked about previously is, really first identifying what's really key, to your organization and focus on those across the suppliers and, see those and see that functionality in the demonstration. And I think it was Josh that mentioned it earlier about, about talking to people. Like, we all have reference companies and you'll be able to talk to people and see their experience. So, sometimes, you might be a little intimidated by saying, oh, of course we can do that. Well, we can get you to talk to somebody that, is similar in size, similar in product makeup. So you can hear their experience, how well it met their needs. and build on there. And, in some cases, we can even get you into a tour, of a facility as long as it's not a competitor, to see that software in action. So, it's just not in a demo state that you've been seeing.
Yeah, on-site tours are so valuable. So Sherif, I received all these quotes, a couple of them are down the street, maybe one is across the country and one is from somewhere overseas. We're so connected, around the world, remote friendly. Do you think that there's really any challenges or benefits to being with somebody local or somebody from the other side of the world?
I don't think so, not in this day and age. Maybe at some point a site visit during implementation for hand holding is necessary, but the initial work is just talking, so and file sharing really, so it can all be done remotely. There's absolutely no need initially, even not even for as I say, a demo. We used to go do demos face to face. Some people still like that, but it's not necessary anymore.
Goronwy, do you think that there's any benefits or challenges with, a distant supplier or somebody nearby?
I mean, I think everybody with Zoom and similar has got used to having online meetings and working that way. But you have to think of when does it actually make a significant difference being on site or not? And I tend to think of when I visit a customer, I always ask, can I walk around the factory? And when you do that, you spot things that would never have come out in conversation.
Yes.
But there might be frames piled high and you'll have 10 days work in progress when you should have 2. Or you have somebody in the factory scribbling out little calculations for the length of muntin bars. So in that type of scenario, local or at least a visit is very helpful. But for most normal things, it shouldn't be necessary.
Yeah, I think that something that I came across when we were dealing with a supplier that was not local, quote unquote, was some of the terminology was challenging, right? Where you've got, somebody on the west coast of Canada would be calling, use something, jam liner. I was dealing with the supplier that didn't know what we were talking about, and we went back and forth for quite a while on what this item was. They were working on a different detail because they thought that we were talking about something different. So I think, in my mind, I think that working with somebody that's more distant from where your company is might be a challenge when you get into terminology. So, here I am, my company, I don't have dedicated staff to do this implementation. That's a tough word sometimes. I'm a relatively small company. Can I get by with using staff that have existing roles in my company to manage the project? What if any challenges and benefits to maybe having the vendor do, all of that implementation? Chris, what's the challenges there?
Well, I'd like to go back to one thing on the last statement was, when we're implementing or you're talking about companies who are far away, right? One of the things you need to think about is the availability of work time. So when they're going to be implementing and stuff like that, what is your support system going to be from that company? Have that serious discussion about what is support. That is an important conversation you guys need to have. You don't want to be left out on an island by anyone. Mm-hmm. The challenges mainly when you're doing an implementation, one of them, there are many obviously, is staying on task, right? That's why you have a serious conversation. That's why you have the tour of the factory, go through it, understand what responsibilities are, list them out, create a scope, create a calendar, really whiteboard everything you can whiteboard, and other things will come up in those discussions that you didn't really realize.
Yeah, I go ahead, Josh. Looks like
I want to kind of add on that too, because it's, whether the software supplier is doing the implementation or the customer is doing the implementation, that's kind of a binary way, black or white of doing it. And really, we see implementations as more of a conglomeration. Someone can lay down a big giant check for an ERP system, but it still takes the dedication of the ownership, the management, and the functional employees to actually make an implementation work. There has to be real buy-in, up and down an organization. And so it's really important to, at the beginning of a project, to make sure that a company taking on this task and implementation, they understand exactly what their role is. They understand exactly what their tasks are. They understand exactly what their resources need to be towards them. Because you could have as enthusiastic of a management team, ready to write a big check. But if they don't have the functional supervisors that are willing to, learn the software the way that it's intended, you're going to end up with a bad implementation. And so it is very important to spend a lot of time on that front end scoping and whiteboarding sessions to make sure that, everybody's on board with exactly what's going to happen and that it's completely definable.
I think those are such excellent points.
Excuse me for a moment, though, but it's important to understand that you should never blame the customer. If something is going wrong,
of course,
it's not the customer's fault.
Exactly.
I'm not sure I agree with that because,
it's never the customer's fault, because if you did not understand that the customer is not going to be able to do something, you shouldn't have put it on their task list. Simple.
Yeah. I understand where you're going, and you make a good point. I think the mistake made by, companies that get into these implementations is that they think that they can have their production manager be the lead on the implementation, or their purchaser, or whoever it might be. An implementation is 100% full-time job, in my opinion. And, I don't know.
It's 100% full-time job for the implementer, which is typically should be the company that's selling you the software. From your end, your implementation is just change management. You supply data and you manage the changes that a new system what happens in the company using a new system. But the implementation should be, the onus of the implementation should be put on the supplier.
I think both sides need to feel that onus. They need to feel committed to it being their project. All the departmental heads need to be signed up to it and not feel it's something being imposed on them either by top management or from the supplier's proposals.
I would agree.
Difficult. It's very
you need to have a project champion on the customer side.
Too many voices. Go ahead, Matt.
You need to have a project champion driving it on the customer side. And in my opinion and experiences, our customers that are involved in the implementation, being able to configure the software, they're the ones that get the most out of it long term, because they're not having to come back to the supplier, for assistance because they know it so well. And you do need to have somebody dedicated to managing on the customer side, the whole team. Yes, you're going to bring in order entry, you're going to bring in production to help on their areas because they have the functional expertise for those business rules and those processes. But it's both ways. The customer needs to have somebody on their end driving it, as well as the project manager on the implementation side.
Yeah, and I think that's the point I'm trying to make, is that some companies, some manufacturers get into this thinking that they can have their current employees be that champion. And I don't know that that's possible without having them dedicated as a full-time role to that implementation. I think that's the point I'm trying to make.
But that's really a big decision to make, because then your cost of implementation of a software is double what the software cost is, because you have a dedicated person. That's typically a couple of hours a week should be enough. At the end of the implementation, we start training people on how to use and configure the software to become self-sufficient. But let's get the software working first. That's the idea.
Yeah. Okay. So here I am. I received, and you guys touched on this a little bit, but I'd like to expand on it a little bit. I received a quote from my supplier that's never been in my facility. Should I have some concerns about this? So
yes.
Nick, you've been quiet over there. What do you think?
Yeah, I think as we were talking about earlier, that it's important to walk a facility, see those things like the stacked frames and the workers calculating the mutton bars by hand, because you don't see those things remotely. No matter how many demos you do, There'll be those things that you just don't have without that on-site facility tour. So I would say, a quote without seeing a facility is great for budgetary purposes, but before I sign off, I'd want that supplier to come to my facility and take a tour.
Yeah, and sometimes too, it's going to depend on the application, what's being done. I mean, I think most of the folks on here are mostly window folks where, there's a lot of things involved in building a particular window. But within our industry, there are small glass shops where there's things that we can sell to them, remotely just on the glass side, or certainly on, curtain wall framing. There's smaller ERP type or software type tools that you don't necessarily need to be, but certainly it's a matter of size. And if it's any sort of detailed implementation, with a lot of different people, a lot of machinery, a lot of moving parts, you're going to want to be on site to get the details of that.
Yeah, I think it's key. And it's a big part of a software supplier getting a feel for the company.
Yeah.
Like Goronwy mentioned, right? Stacked up frames everywhere. You start to get an idea of how organized this company is or isn't, right? So definitely required. So, everybody today has online reviews of their products, and they, oftentimes or rarely in my view, that they really get into the negative sort of results because those either get deleted or whitewashed somewhere. So you guys mentioned this as well. You recommend that, I visit other manufacturers that are using this software. And what should you look for when you're doing that? I'm going to share a little bit of my experience. I visited a number of manufacturers that were using software that we were looking at, and I got, into the weeds and sat down with people in order entry and people in purchasing, and, the body language that you can pick up on from somebody when you're sitting chatting with them about something is invaluable. A roll of the eyes when you ask a question or something like that. So I think it's really valuable to have those interactions, on site with other users of the software. Sherif, looks like you might have a comment on that.
No, I agree with you. Absolutely. It's a great way of doing it. Unfortunately, not everybody can.
Not nowadays.
So the second best thing is to call references. That's important, but a visit is a wonderful thing if you can do it.
Yeah, and your software provider should be able to provide you references that are real relevant to the kind of installation that that a particular company is looking for. They should have some close matches out there. Good for you to talk to.
I think it's important to think about what makes a similar business. First of all, there's material. Vinyl is different from wood, it's different from steel, it's different from aluminum.
Yep.
And then you've got what type of sales they do. Is it residential? Is it commercial? Is it through dealers? And then, of course, you've got size. If they're doing a small job per week or they're doing several hundred windows a day, that also makes a big difference.
Yeah, those are really key points, and I think that people need to really grasp onto that. If you're a medium-sized, progressive, highly custom company, don't go and visit a factory that's cranking out 1,000 of the same window using that software. Obviously, you're going to get very different views. So that's good. Definitely, you really need to make an effort to go and visit other companies that are similar. So something else that I ran into quite a bit when I was working in these implementations was the term out of the box. How much out of the box functionality, should I really expect to see or demand? Do most systems require customization to suit my products and business rules? Is the term out of the box when you're talking about software a reality? Chris, what do you think?
I think that there is some amount of out of the box capability that you start with, and then it depends upon what your needs are. Going back to the discussion of walking the plant, that will help you get an idea of what's out there. What do they need to have customized for them? Is the system configurable or not? In most systems, at least A&W's, it is going to configurable system with a base out of the box capability.
Anybody else?
Josh?
Can I?
Sure.
Or Matt, go for it.
Yeah. I think to build on Chris's point, I think it's important to define out of the box, which is configuration, because a software package in my mind has a lot of out of the box functionality, but the out of the box functionality is dependent upon the configuration, the business
Right.
rules, the bills of material that go into that. I think that's one challenge where some people don't realize going into the implementation is, while we are built for this industry, because everybody has configurable products, different rules, there's a lot that goes into the configuration with that. And I don't consider configuration necessarily customizing, but it is work that needs to go in, and then you build on the custom reports, the custom, interfaces and things that are particular to a company.
I think that's, again, another point that's really key, because, a manufacturer hears, well, our system is designed for windows and doors. I should be able to just, plug my window in because you've done it for 1,000 other guys. How come I've got to make all of these adjustments? But the reality is that all companies have different rules, have different products, have different options. And I think a lot of manufacturers miss that when they think that they can just plug a system in and away you go. Anybody further thoughts?
The customization nowadays, even small companies require customizations. And I'm not talking about configuration of the product, windows and doors. I'm talking about business processes. At the end of the day, it's the business processes that make or break an implementation. Can you handle those? Can you adapt your software to the way they do business, rather than you telling them, here is the way you're going to do business from now on because you're using my software? And that has changed lately. And I think people have to realize that part of the implementation is to get your product working, meaning that you can build your windows and doors, but then customize the software for the rest of the business functionality. And that's really out of the box, is the part that builds the windows. The rest, some of the rest, inventory control, etc., is still standard, but there are very specific functionalities you can find that are different from company to company.
Yeah, yeah.
The chances of an out-of-the-box solution depends on what's in the box. So at Windowmaker, we've put 600 man-years R&D, and that's gone into the box. So the chances of having solutions to your problems are fairly high. But you've also got to think there's a software element to that, but then there's a data, like a catalog element to it. If you're dealing with somebody who deals with a particular profile system or a different door slab supplier, and you've got that out of the box, then that's great. And then you will have customizations, but not normally to the software. The customizations will be to your rules, to your processes, to those catalogs.
So again, then I think that the key takeaway for a manufacturer is there is no plug and play. There's going to be some customization. You do things differently than other people. You use different terminology. You might have, different option matrices, pricing, etc. So there's going to be customization. Just accept that, and you'll have much more success. So, what about by current technology? I think that I've got a system in my business right now that, I've got a little network or a big network and everything works, and I'm running, Vista, Microsoft Vista, and, a couple of dot matrix printers in the back. Do I need to upgrade? And what's the reality? More servers, bigger infrastructure, on-site, cloud. Josh, where are we going when?
Yeah, I mean, that's a spectacularly important question to answer at the beginning of a particular project. So most software providers, us obviously included, we do spend a lot of time on that front end, making sure that their networking speed is satisfactory. At least they have the specifications for that. If they want to have on-site servers, or whether they would like to go to cloud hosted servers, or whether they're looking for a pure cloud solution, which there's some gray area in there. But that is a very, very important conversation, because most of our software is run in a server type environment. There are costs to that, and there's a lot of different options for that. And a provider needs to be able to successfully and efficiently articulate that, not only to the company looking to buy the software, but their IT folks, as well as if they have a third-party IT company that they're working. So yeah, on the front end, I mean, an implementation can go really, really bad if there's simply not enough firepower in the servers, or internet speed is too slow, or a host of different issues. So that is paramount ahead of doing any sort of implementation.
Anybody else?
A common
Not
rule of
just
thumb is review your hardware every 3 years.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's not about just systems anymore. I mean, hardware, etc. It's the rest of the business software that they use,
Yeah,
CRM,
Mhm.
etc. How do you
Outlook.
integrate all of those together? Do you have open APIs? Can you replace those other pieces of software? So it's become much more complex lately because of so many different. For example, just to give you an example of a customer that we had, they had a CRM system with one company, they had a service system with another company, and they had a manufacturing system with another company.
Yeah.
And they had to integrate all that together. It becomes daunting. So that's one of the things that you have to work with the customer, whether you can replace or integrate all those distinct pieces of software.
So your company's, that's not something that your company does, right? So would it be recommended that they either work with a third-party IT or hardware company to make sure that their systems are capable of, handling what your systems are going to bring into the mix?
In terms of hardware, it's always best to look for local suppliers or cloud suppliers, whether we're hosting it or they want to have their own cloud servers or in on-site servers. Software-wise, we can handle that. Typically, I think all of us can handle that.
Yeah.
But if the customer's using, for example, an accounting system that is no longer supported by its suppliers, then you definitely want focus on getting a replacement for that, which might involve bringing in a new supplier, especially for that area.
So it's key to understand that your systems are going to be capable and to work with your companies and somebody else that has expertise in those fields of hardware and software that could be integrated. The cost can climb really quickly when you get into adding servers and things into your system. So something that you really need to look at while you're doing this.
Even large companies now try to go cloud. From our experience, we find very few companies that want to have their own servers nowadays, at least.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Good. Sherif, you touched on this about integration. So most manufacturers today have some level of automated machinery, be it saws, welders, cutting bridges. How easy is it to integrate those machines into your systems? And I know that that's just a very general question, but what should I be looking out for? Age of those integrated systems.
Definitely, age of the hardware itself. An old Tiger stop, you might have to replace the whole controller, and that, and it will cost you quite a lot of money to replace a controller on it.
Yeah.
Again, same with welders, saws, CNCs, working centers, etc. Depends on the age of it and what capabilities it has. So you have to be very careful. You can go buy a Turkish CNC machine, and then they will stick you with a German company that does the CNC machining rules or whatever, and you're gonna find yourself trying to integrate to you put yourself in a bad position sometimes, buying a machine without thinking of integration, or having an old machine, or worse, buying a used machine.
Yeah, if you've got machinery where there is not documentation on how to interface to it, you are in big trouble.
Yeah.
And you possibly need to do reverse engineering. You definitely need to come up with a user acceptance test where, for a particular set of inputs, you get perfect outputs. And occasionally they are failure points. Occasionally the machinery has to be disposed of and totally replaced.
Yeah. So highly recommend that you connect that machinery's IT people to your people before you pull the trigger on, yeah, we can integrate everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. A lot of times you can get that information in your manuals if they don't already supply it. But I always like to check the model, the machine, and the formats, just so there isn't surprises. Because I'm sure all of us here, we have pretty standard interfaces for a lot of the mainstream equipment. But occasionally a manufacturer, even if it's a new machine, might add a few extra fields that are needed for some new tooling that they added to the saw or something like that. So it's always important to check with file formats with the supplier, as well as post implementation. You've implemented it, the software, it's been running for years, and you decide to go buy a new piece of equipment, or you're looking at it. Talk to your supplier, because does an interface need developed because maybe there's something new, or just knowing the impact of what type of configuration you need to have to supply the data to that machine all up front before you pull the trigger is key. Because the last thing you want to do is buy a $250,000 piece of equipment and then realize that you need to spend more money for implementation or a development of a file format.
Yeah. So, we're talking machinery, and you guys touched on this already, that make sure that everything that you have in your organization is able to be integrated if you want it to be. Things like, financial software and, other CRM systems. You really need to dig into those, make sure that you can integrate those systems effectively before you.
Well, Terry, I think it also goes back to just clear communication with your supplier, right? So obviously an open door policy, hey, I'm having to buy this, or I'm looking at doing something. How is this going to work? There has to be a clear path, someone you can easily reach out to at the company and say, hey, we're doing this, please help us.
Yeah, for sure. Okay.
And I also think it goes back to our first question about what should look for, and when you're building that list of requirements to figure out what you're going to start with, where you're going to grow into, is you need to think about oh, I have the CRM system, how important is it to integrate, or should I be looking for a supplier that has a CRM system, and really define all those different pieces and the priority that's important to help you figure out what should be a phase one of an implementation, especially if you're a small company and can't afford a complete system right out of the box.
Yeah, I think that's key that a lot of people miss, is that there's a lot of work that you need to do ahead of time before you even start looking for systems. You need
That's why I put that in the article. You have to really talk about your conditionals.
Yeah.
What your must have, nice to have, essential items. You really have to, and go talk to the stakeholders in your business. Really talk to them and ask them what they're doing. They know the business better than you do sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so here we are, medium-sized company. We have some customization in our products, but most of that information is stored in employees' heads that have been with us for 10 or 15 or 20 years. What do you do? How do you get that information, into a usable format? And we can't get it all. I know that so many things come up after the fact. And again, I think it comes back to this conversation that we're having already about being prepared. How can you get that information out of your employees' heads and into a format that makes sense for you guys? Look at it and say, yes, we can help you here. So Nick, what do you got on something like that?
Yeah, I think that could be one of the most challenging implementations is when the information's in someone's head, it's not documented. So what you have to do is try to get that out, get it documented, from that employee with all the knowledge, which is usually some sort of Excel sheet where they document everything. And then that could be imported into the software system. But I guess most importantly is that information, once documented, should also be audited by someone else, so that it's just accurate. Because one of the worst things you can do is spend time configuring a software system and have it be inaccurate information, which would require rework down the road.
Josh, you got something to add on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously you want to go into a company or a company, it's great for companies to be able to have every process documented with a nice handy little collection of reports and other tools that they use. That's often not the case. So in a whiteboarding session, that's the kind of thing that you're going in and helping them define. But really it is kind of a process audit by us, the provider, as well, because they may have a current process that just simply isn't a real good process. And so they spend time documenting that and have all these reports doing this, but this is why you have software. So this is kind of there's a new state. So it's really comparing what that current state is that they're defining or that you're helping them define in a whiteboarding, and then pairing that with what the future state is once there's an implementation.
The buzzword for what we're talking about is discovery. And it's the supplier's responsibility to make sure that happens. And there's certain common bits. For every supplier, you've got to know what information do you get from them? What's their catalog? How do you get the price list? What do their order forms look like? Similarly, in the factory, you've got all the different stations in the factory. How do you generate the works instructions for each one of those? It's a fairly straightforward methodology that needs to be followed, and the supplier should drive it.
Right, and most often too, the supplier can provide, I know like we have like document templates,
Right.
that we send out ahead of time to pull, that's a lot of that information out. But I do agree with Nick about the auditing, standpoint. I remember one of my first implementations, I was on site and the customer was saying, hey, this, frame was 1/4 of an inch off, and they were coming from a manual system, and it turns out, like, we looked, all the numbers are right, everything was right, except the operator at the saw was always deducting like 1/4 of an inch, and nobody knew it. And but he didn't know that we corrected the dimension coming. The dimension was right in the new system, so he never needed to do that. Nobody told him.
That's funny.
I mean,
That wasn't us, but we were doing the same thing. I absolutely remember that kind of a scenario. That's great.
One thing you want to get out of your employees, the employees' heads, is their wish list for what could be better. People often fail to ask their existing staff what they need improving, and they're the ones who know the answers.
Yeah, you guys all touched on that earlier, is getting as many people involved at the beginning or ahead of the beginning to get that information and to talk to the people that are actually doing the job in every aspect and every department within your company. There's so many things like adding 1/4 of an inch to a cut size. I mean, it sounds so simple, but it can drive everybody crazy trying to figure out what's going on.
Well, they know the pain points better than anyone, right? They use it every single day. They're suffering, and that's why you're looking at buying this. So yeah.
Yeah.
And it creates buy-in because they're part of the process to
Yes.
reduce
Right,
that
definitely.
resistance to
It
change.
looks like you're listening to them, right, Matt? It looks like you're actually
Exactly.
you're interested
Looks
in
like
their,
it.
at least it looks like it, better than
But I think that there's a common mistake held by, some management that thinks they know their business in and out. And they may know the business, but they don't understand the intricacies of all of the things that the people do that actually make the products, et cetera. So,
Well, going back to Matt's example, that person probably thought he knew his business really well, but he didn't know what the worker on the floor was doing. He
Yeah.
can't know all that.
no,
Right,
absolutely.
exactly.
Include everybody. So, okay, that's great. I think that a common mistake, and again, you guys have touched on this, but I think we need to expand on it a bit. Companies that take on way more than they need or they can handle. Everybody, I think, has scalable systems. Is it better for a company to tackle tip to tail systems to ensure compatibility? Or do you recommend, here, let's just start with this little piece of the pie and we can build things later? Go ahead, whoever, just jump in.
I personally think it goes back to what people have said before, is that it really matters on your discovery section. What are you doing in discovery? You really have to focus on that aspect first.
Yeah, budget and resources obviously play into that as well, because you could be on site with a customer and they need everything kind of throughout tip to tail. Yet it may not make sense to do a full implementation. You can give them pricing on what the whole end solution looks like, but then phase that out into something that makes sense in a year 1 and a year 2 and a year 3. So it's really contextual based on on the customer and their ability to be able to implement.
That word phase is the critical word. You've got to plan the whole thing in phases. Tackle the easy, the low-hanging fruit in the first phases, and listen to what is easy and what is difficult, because they're not the obvious things. So, for example, barcode tracking tends to actually be extremely easy, but inventory stock control is extremely difficult because you get differences between the figures in your software and the figures out in the stores.
Yeah.
And then all sorts of workarounds to try and tackle that. And people don't have the discipline. So put the inventory off for 6 months, tackle the tracking, for example.
Yeah. Sherif, did you have something there?
Absolutely. A phased approach. I agree with Goronwy on that. Absolutely.
So that leads right into sort of integrating in your entire company into a system is obviously daunting and can become a bit of a white elephant. And my guess, just listening to you guys, is that the right structure probably is different for every company. But is there sort of a accepted logical, here's the implementation phases that make the most sense? Josh, like, do you start with, you tell me, do you start with my pricing matrix or?
Well, man, that honestly, it really depends on the needs of the company looking for the solution. They may have something that works okay on the front end, maybe a homegrown system, but their real issue is once it hits scheduling, they have no way to schedule it. So in that particular situation, you can work with, an XML feed or some EDI or something else from their current front end system and tackle the production side, if you will, or the capacity planning side first. But in other organizations, their front end may be a total disaster as well as their back end. And so then you do kind of want to start the front. So it's really contextual based on, what that customer looks like.
Yeah. Anybody else on that? Goronwy, muted, I think.
You're muted, Goronwy. I think all systems begin with the core configuration of the product, whether it's cut lists, bills of materials, costing, and from that pricing. Nowadays, we find that most companies' price books have become tedious to maintain, so most companies are working on marked up cost. So the bill of materials is the core, and that drives the rest of the system. Without that, you don't have a system. So that's number one step.
Yeah.
Then production.
Mentioning bill of materials, that's such a great one. And I go back to my comment about, employees having things in their heads. A lot of companies don't know all the parts that go into making one of their windows. So that's really key. Goronwy, we lost your sound there. Did you have something that you wanted to add?
So I was also stressing the importance of getting the bill of materials right, particularly regarding sizes. Because if something's the wrong size, it's expensive to correct.
Yeah.
If you've got a screw missing or a screw too many, that's not too serious.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, you guys commented to this in a number of places. I'd like to try and get sort of your last point here. The best laid and thought out implementations can go bad. Where do you think the most common problems come from? What can lead to a disaster in implementation? Chris, you want to grab that one?
I think we've gone back to the whole buy-in from everyone in the business, right? So if people haven't bought in, if you've got your people on the floor who are just so set on the old way, and I love that way, they're not going to help you implement. So you need to have buy-in from everyone in the process and show them that, they can improve and, that software can really actually help them make their life easier, and two, improve their process.
Yeah. Do you think that some employees are scared of software? They're going to lose their job because, the software is going to replace you?
I run across that a lot. Yes. I think people are just, I mean, change is hard, right? If you ask any company, you ask any person, change is always the hardest thing to do.
Yeah.
Change is always, we all want to stay in the old phrase, set in my ways.
Yeah.
Set in your ways. Everyone likes to do their own thing and do it their way every time.
Yeah.
But learning is important and advancement is important.
Anybody else? Common problems that make implementations go bad?
Yeah.
Everybody jumps
Everybody
in.
has some of those. Everyone has some of those.
You know what? I'm going to go around the table then. Sherif, common problem.
Change management, number one. That's the only one, really. The rest, once you make a decision, it's made.
Yeah.
If you can't handle the change, it will fail.
Matt?
I would go back to the project champion on the manufacturing side, combined with being able to dedicate resources. Because so often projects drag out because people cannot. It's hard if they're doing they're the customer service manager and they need to configure pricing. They need to have time dedicated to do any work on their side, and if they don't, that gets frustrating as timelines move out.
For sure. Goronwy, common problems?
You train one person in some area and then a couple of months later that person leaves.
Oh, yeah.
So double up, train two, at least.
Yeah. Nick, common problems guys run into?
Yeah, I would say staff that isn't educated on the software system and attempting to go live with that person that isn't educated, because they can make mistakes and cause a lot of issues downstream.
Josh?
Yeah, mine ties into both the Fene-Tech guys there in setting an unrealistic implementation calendar, or the customer having an unrealistic expectation of how the implementation is going to go. Different organizations are going to have different levels of resources that they can dedicate to an implementation. And so, for the provider, when we're building a calendar, we need to be very well aware of how much time they're going to be able to spend doing this data entry. We need to understand very well how many systems they're entering and what that's going to take. So that way we can understand how long it's going to take for them to do their tasks. We understand how long it's going to take for us to do our tasks. And all of that is basically, ratified ahead of time in that project scope, because the same implementation for companies, one may take twice as long because they simply don't have the resources, the humans, to be able to do the implementation.
Yeah, schedules. Okay, that's a big one. Okay, Steph, do we have any questions?
Not that I can see as of now.
Okay, we'll give it a second. Well, that was some good stuff, guys. Really great information. Good conversation. Hopefully it sheds a bit of light and opens some eyes, help people understand what the challenges can be.
I mean, the most one comment that I'd like to make is you have to decide how much investments you have, or you're going to put into time and money in software, and always look for a good return on investment.
Yeah.
And know that all software, no matter what, you're going to have to spend money on making it your own. That means you go to Fene-Tech, you're going to ask Fene-Tech to change reports. Same with Windowmaker, same with A+W, same with OpenJanela. Everywhere you're going to have to spend money on making that software your own. And that's really the key. You don't get into a software thinking it's going to do everything you want. It's going to do the basics. Then you're going to spend money on making it.
But it is reasonable for the supplier's proposal to expect the supplier's proposal to cover those areas.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
I think that's key. That sometimes that's not always well defined, and can be a surprise to a purchaser when they get into something and realize that they need to put more work in than they thought. But a good system with a good implementation, it's invaluable. It'll make your company a so much better company. Build structure within your company, streamline systems, streamline roles. And jobs. So I think a good system with a good implementation is it's critical for today's business and for the future. So Steph, no questions?
Nope.
Okay, so I want to thank my guests today, Chris, Josh, Matt, Nick, Sherif, and Goronwy. Appreciate you guys sharing your insight with our members faced with such an impactful choice in their businesses. want to thank our listeners. I appreciate you guys taking the time to tune in today. And of course, to Keystone Tech NAFS Calculator sponsor for all your product NAFS and thermal certification needs, call Keystone. Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate you guys' participation. And we'll chat next time.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.